Why, Kalen DeBoer? Why? That's what Alabama fans want to know. After Oklahoma 23, Alabama 21. Why would you do this to yourself? Why would you put your postseason life on the line in, of all places, Auburn, Alabama, in Jordan-Hare Stadium? And to make matters worse, we found out today, the SEC office announcing the kickoff times for Thanksgiving weekend. Guess which game is going to kick off at 6:30 p.m. Central Standard Time in Jordan-Hare Stadium? It's going to be the Iron Bowl. The first time in a long time that game will be played entirely after dark, which makes the proposition for Alabama in a must-win predicament all the more precarious, because Alabama is going to spend the 2025 Iron Bowl with 60 minutes in hell. It's not too strong a phrase given the history of that game in that place. And I don't care. Yes, I am aware, Alabama fans, that Kalen DeBoer has coached in a national championship game just 2 seasons ago. And still, and yet, I will argue that this game in a little less than 2 weeks on November 29th, again, kickoff 6:30 p.m. Central Time, will be the most difficult environment he has ever walked into with a football team behind him. He doesn't know what he's about to experience. You can't know until you live it, until you feel it, until it rattles your bones, makes your teeth ache, and you stare into the abyss that is the Iron Bowl in Auburn. We're going to talk about that today, because why not? It's never too early to talk about the Iron Bowl, especially when the next games on the schedule for Alabama and Auburn are Eastern Illinois and Mercer. No offense to those FCS opponents. Eastern Illinois, not very good, not having a very good season. Mercer, very good, having a very good season. But that's not what we're here to talk about today on Scarbo Knows. I am Scarbo, a.k.a. Kevin Scarbinsky. Thank you for joining us. If you're watching live, we appreciate that. On the Sidelines.live network with executive producer Brendan Martin, expertly steering the ship as always. We hope you will follow the network on Twitter. There you see the QR code on the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, we always encourage you, Kevin Scarbinsky Scarbo Knows. Subscribe to the channel. Help us continue to grow. You've done a great job of that so far. We've loved hanging out with you over these last few months. It's only going to get better and better as we get deeper and deeper into football, and then as we get deeper and deeper into basketball. And we saw 2 fantastic ranked basketball games in the last 4 days. We saw Purdue beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. We saw Houston beat Auburn in Birmingham yesterday. Fantastic crowds. Both the Alabama and Auburn fans showed up, showed out. Kudos to everyone who was there. And a special thank you, as always, to our sponsor, Money Management Services. They are Birmingham's financial services firm. They are a family-owned, fee-only financial services business. They've been in business since 1992. The Rice family, great friends of mine. They'll take great care of you. We'll hear more from them later in the show. So let's get to it. And some news today, and we love to deal with breaking news, and that is that Auburn has decided that Ashton Daniels, the quarterback who came out of nowhere to challenge Diego Pavia and make Vanderbilt sweat into overtime in Auburn's last game before it had this past Saturday off, Ashton Daniels will not play against Mercer. Auburn is going to preserve his red shirt, so he will be able to return next season should he choose, and I'm guessing this means he chooses. So he won't play against Mercer. DJ Durkin, the interim head coach, said today that either Jackson Arnold or Deuce Knight, it may be a combination, the freshman, 5-star, they'll play this weekend against Mercer. That game means very little to either team, actually. Mercer's already clinched its second straight Southern Conference championship. Kudos to the Bears. They're the first team in that league to do that since, I think, App State back in 08 and 09. So Mercer, a very good football team. But what happens in Jordan-Hare in that game is meaningless. I'm sorry. What happens in Bryant-Denny Stadium on Saturday? Yeah, it's senior day. Nice ceremony for the veterans. But the ultimate outcome is meaningless. Alabama could send me out there as a walk-on quarterback and beat Eastern Illinois. I think I could still crank up the old arm and throw a few balls. But either way, we are already looking forward to the Iron Bowl because Alabama has put itself behind the 8 ball by losing to Oklahoma. Giving the game away is one way to look at it. 3 turnovers, 3 costly turnovers, including a pick 6 that Ty Simpson threw early. That put Alabama behind the 8 ball and had them running uphill the rest of the day pretty much. And then there were 2 other turnovers, very costly, a botched field goal. And by the way, Connor Talty, I don't care if you are statistically the best kicker in the country, which statistically you are far from. If there's a high snap on a 30-something yard field goal, but the holder goes up and gets it, and he puts it down in pretty good position, and you absolutely shank the kick, you have no business biting the head off of your snapper after the miss. In front of God and everybody, right there in Bryant-Denny on national television, as if you're telling the world it wasn't my fault. I'm sorry, that kick was so wrong and so off that a perfect snap and hold would not have mattered. And I'm still not sure about the jumping over the line penalty, non-penalty. There was no flag. It was explained that the Oklahoma player that did leap over the gap between the center and the guard did so legally. There are some asterisks attached to that rule. But still, that's no excuse. It's no reason. That's not why Alabama lost. Alabama had almost double the yards of Oklahoma, and yet it still managed to lose the game, which was the worst possible thing for Alabama, again, because it has one SEC game left on the schedule, and it's the Iron Bowl, and it's not in Tuscaloosa. But let's look at the difference that losing that game made for Alabama in the polls. Now, we won't see the playoff poll implications until Tuesday night, but just in the AP poll that came out Sunday, and there's really never much difference between the AP poll and the college football playoff poll. So on the left, you see where Alabama stood in the playoff poll last week before Oklahoma came to town. Alabama, of course, was number 4. Then you see that they fell. They were number 4 in the AP poll as well last week. And then after the loss on Sunday, they dropped to number 10. That is a precarious place to be if they are in that same spot in the playoff poll on Tuesday night. Because as we know, because you must have 5 conference champions in the field, there will be teams that are not ranked in the top 12. One of them, at least one of them from the group of 5, one of them from the ACC, that will leapfrog some of the teams that are ranked above them to take those automatic spots. And Alabama, like it did last year, has now put itself in position to possibly finish 9-3 and not make the playoff. Now, that would not be Armageddon for Kalen DeBoer, but it would be on the road to Armageddon, shall we say. He's not coaching for his job in this game in 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks now. Let's be clear about that. Alabama's not going to fire Kalen DeBoer if he goes 9-3 and does not make the playoff. But it will make for a very uncomfortable offseason, and it will ramp up the expectations and the necessity of getting into the playoff next season, which is going to be more difficult because you will face a 9-game SEC schedule for the first time. And every time you play an SEC school, as Alabama found out Saturday, you risk losing the game, especially when you play Oklahoma. And I'm going to guess that if you could go back and re-vote on admitting the Sooners to the conference, the presidents of Alabama and Auburn might change their vote. because Oklahoma is now 4-0 against Alabama and Auburn in its 2 years in the conference. How does that happen? Well, we know how it happens against Auburn. That's why Auburn's looking for a new coach. And all signs continue to point toward Tulane's John Summerall on that front. But Alabama now 0-2 against Oklahoma in SEC play. So all eyes will be on that playoff poll on Tuesday night because Alabama is going to be in that number 10 range. And pay attention to where Alabama comes in vis-a-vis Notre Dame. Now, I would argue that the AP poll got it wrong. And this is not local bias. This is based on whom you have beaten. And if you look at whom Alabama has beaten versus whom Notre Dame has beaten, I don't think there's a comparison. And I think it's more important whom you have beaten than whom you have lost to. Not trying to go all English teacher on you here. But wins should matter more than losses. Have you beaten good teams? Have you beaten good teams away from home? Have you beaten Georgia, which right now looks like as good a team as there is in the country, after that very thorough whipping of Texas on Saturday? Alabama went into that same stadium between the hedges in Athens and took care of business earlier in the season. So I would argue that Alabama should be ahead of Notre Dame. But the AP voters, as a group, thought otherwise. So pay very, very close attention to where Alabama and Notre Dame come in the playoff poll on Tuesday night. But beyond that, everyone is looking forward to November 29th. And if you're an Alabama fan, you're not looking forward to it with gusto. This was hilarious today on social media, on X or Twitter, if you prefer. When they SEC announced the start time, the kickoff time for the Iron Bowl at 6:30. Of course, both schools on their own Twitter accounts put out a post letting their fans know that. And the responses to Alabama's post from Alabama fans were laugh out loud funny. Let's look at some of those because they know what it means for Alabama to go to Auburn. Boston Bammer tweeting out a picture of J. Robert Oppenheimer from the movie. Outstanding movie, by the way. One of the best I've seen in years. From, a year or two ago now? Looking like he's just discovered that he may have created something that could destroy civilization as we know it. That's the look that a lot of Alabama fans will have as they walk into Jordan-Hare Stadium a week from Saturday. Tayshawn at All-Time Bama tweeted, Jordan-Hare Black Magic, God help us all. Jack Selman, yeah, we're done. Bama teams in the past can barely handle a 2:30 start at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Not this team, not at night. It's over. And Squid the Goat, I don't know what that character is supposed to be in the picture he attached to his tweet. A damn night game in that voodoo stadium with the playoffs on the line. And the picture of that character looks absolutely sick. And I tweeted this out on Saturday, shortly after Alabama completed its loss to Oklahoma by failing to drive down the field. We thought, well, they had an opportunity to drive down, kick a field goal, win the game. Maybe. Given Connor Talty's attitude on the day, not sure that would have worked had they even gotten into position, which they didn't. But when that game ended, I tweeted, in exactly 14 days, Kalen DeBoer is going to feel more pressure on a football field than he's ever felt in his life. And you wouldn't believe how many Alabama fans responded and agreed with me. But the best reaction that I've seen so far on social media to Alabama putting its playoff life on the line at Auburn by losing to Oklahoma came from a longtime correspondent of mine on Twitter today, just a short while ago, and I had to throw this in there. Let's look at what Malzahn Hangs 60 had to say, and I think he said it best. In response to something that I tweeted, I'm an old Auburn guy, he said. Auburn fans are enthusiastic but friendly. Every game except one. Hell, I have been frightened myself, and I'm wearing the right colors. You can't capture what it means for Alabama to play the Iron Bowl in Auburn any better than that. I've been frightened myself, and I'm wearing the right colors. Well said, Malzahn Hang 60. Very, very well said. And of course, the most infamous quote from the most famous person about the Iron Bowl in Auburn came from Nick Saban himself. And he said it. He said it many times in many different forums. He said it last year on College Game Day. In fact, he said it last season before Texas A&M went into Auburn, and Auburn was floundering, and A&M was in a good spot, maybe in position to get to the SEC championship game a year ago in its first year under Mike Elko. And on game day that morning, Nick Saban said, "That place is haunted." And what happened that night? Texas A&M lost to Auburn in multiple overtimes and started A&M's spiral at the end of the season, reinforcing the malady known as battered Aggie syndrome, which was alive and well in the first half Saturday when South Carolina raced out to that 30-3 lead, and Shane Beamer did the one thing you don't do. He gloated. He boasted. He stuck it in the fans' face as he walked off the field in Kyle Field with that big halftime lead. Bad idea. Bad juju. South Carolina didn't score again, and Texas A&M staged the biggest comeback in modern SEC history, or at least SEC history for some time back. And A&M won the game to stay undefeated. And now they are, of course, because Alabama lost to Oklahoma, the Aggies are the only undefeated team in SEC play. They're undefeated overall as well. So let's look at that quote from Nick Saban. And let's look at the results of the 17 Iron Bowls that have been played in the loveliest village on the plains. Brendan, can we take a look at that? The scoreboard, of course, has it Auburn 10, Alabama 7. Auburn has won 10 of those games in Jordan-Hare Stadium. Alabama has won 7. Fun fact, Alabama has won the last 2. Of course, it took Bryce Young driving the length of the field in 2021 in the last 90 seconds or so to score a touchdown, tie the game, send it into overtime against Brian Harsin and company with TJ Finley at quarterback. And then 2 years ago, Jalen Milroe. Alabama looked dead in the water. They're trying to get to the playoff. Little did we know it would be Nick Saban's last Iron Bowl. Alabama's losing as we get to the fourth quarter. And what happens? It gets to 4th and 31, 4th and goal from the 31-yard line. And Auburn dials up the worst defensive set in the history of college football. They rushed 2. They dropped 8. One guy kind of hung around the line of scrimmage as if he were a spy. He wasn't going to run down Jalen Milroe, but neither was Jalen Milroe going to run 31 yards through the entire Auburn defense to get to the end zone to take the lead and win the game. So instead, he threw a dart after about 8 or 9 seconds of surveying the field on a play called Gravedigger. And right then, he started throwing dirt on Hugh Freeze's tenure at Auburn. So let's look at these numbers. Again, this is every Iron Bowl that's been played in Auburn. The first one, 1989. A lot of these games have nicknames. That was the final brick for Auburn. Alabama was the final team that had refused for decades and decades and decades and decades to ever set foot in that place. And finally, Pat Dye, the force of his personality, the quality of his program, dragged Alabama's ass onto Auburn's grass. And there was no way the Green Bay Packers under Vince Lombardi could have walked into that stadium that day and not beaten those Auburn Tigers. I can tell you that. I was there. You've never experienced emotion at a sporting event beyond what Auburn people felt that day. In fact, There were Auburn players who were so pumped up, they hyperventilated during Tiger Walk. James Joseph, who was about 6'2", 225-pound tailback, as tough as nails, they had to get a brown paper bag for him to calm down his breathing. He was so overwhelmed after Tiger Walk. That emotion can never quite be replicated because it was the first time. And Auburn won the first 4 in the series in their own sandbox. Alabama got a couple in a row then. Then Auburn won 3 more. And if you notice, then Alabama won back-to-back in 09 and 11. Then came the kick 6. Then Derrick Henry carried about 87 times in 2015 on the way to the Heisman. Fairly easy Alabama win that day. Then Auburn won 2 straight. Then Alabama's won the last 2 straight. Although that is so perilously close to 4 straight Auburn victories the last 4 times Alabama has set foot in that stadium. But what you notice there is Alabama has not yet, emphasis on yet, because this is what Kalen DeBoer and company will have to do to get to the playoff, Alabama has not yet won 3 straight trips to Auburn. It can do that on November 29th. I'm not sure they will. I'm not making a prediction yet. It's a little too early for that. But what we can feel confident about, because of the nature of this rivalry, because of the way these games have played out in that building, that you better plan to stay for 60 minutes at least. Because the game most likely will not be decided until the final horn. And what does every football player, every football coach, every football fan, what does everyone do when you get to the fourth quarter? They hold up the 4 fingers. I'm going to figure out where the camera is yet one day on this thing. They hold up the 4 fingers and they say the fourth quarter is ours. Half of them are lying because the fourth quarter will not be yours, because only one team will walk away with a victory. Let's look at the fourth quarter. This is an amazing statistics. Sometimes I like, I'm a word guy. I'm a writer. But numbers fascinate me. And every once in a while, I go down a rabbit hole and I start looking up statistics, and something catches my eye. And next thing you know, I'm scribbling on my legal pad and I'm coming up with some wild numbers. Now, this is a little convoluted, this statistic, I admit. But I looked back over the last 11 Iron Bowls in Auburn, starting in 2003. And I started there because that one was significant, because a week or so before the game, it was a week of the game, if I recall, Auburn low-key fired Tommy Tuberville, but didn't tell him. Meanwhile, they were jetting off to see Bobby Petrino and interview him they knew they were going to hire him. There was no need for them to take the trip, but they did anyway, because the president was an engineer. He didn't understand leadership and coaching searches and things like that. Hopefully the new president of Auburn, who is an engineer himself, Christopher Roberts, that's his background. Hopefully he does a better job of finishing this search with the right guy, John Sumrall. So I decided to look at the fourth quarter, because so many of these games are decided in the fourth quarter. But then I noticed something. For the most part, Auburn leads for most of these fourth quarters. And I threw out 2011 because that was an Alabama blowout. And I threw out 2015 because that was an Alabama blowout. All these other games were relatively close. So I compiled the numbers from 9 of the last 11 Iron Bowls in Auburn. Keywords. And in those 9 games, 2003, 05, 07, 09, 13, 17, 19, 2021, and 2023, Auburn led. There were 135 minutes of football time in those fourth quarters in those 9 games combined. Of those 135 minutes, Auburn led 112 minutes and 4 seconds. Think about that. Out of 135 minutes in the fourth quarters in those 9 games in Auburn, Auburn led for 112 minutes and 4 seconds. How long did Alabama lead in that same period? 17 minutes and 28 seconds. How often was the game tied? 5 minutes and 28 seconds. And yet, in those 9 games, Auburn won 6. You would think they won them all with that lopsided statistic that they owned the lead for, I didn't do the percentages, what's that, 90% of that time or more than 90%? Can't do that without a pad and paper or a calculator. But overwhelmingly, Auburn led in the fourth quarter. And yet Alabama did manage to find a way in 2021, in 2023, and 2009, which is what surprises me. Greg McElroy, he was the quarterback for Alabama back in 2009, right? And Alabama's undefeated. They go into Jordan-Hare Stadium. Auburn has 4 losses or so, 4 or 5 losses at the time. They're not ranked. They're not going anywhere. It's Gene Chizik's first season. And Gus Malzahn pulled some rabbits out of his hat. Before you knew it, Auburn was winning 14-0. And then you're in the fourth quarter, and Alabama has the ball midway through the fourth quarter, and they're trailing in the game. And McElroy does a great job leading them down the field, hitting Julio Jones on short route after short route. And they get down to the goal line, and he throws a winning touch. McElroy throws the winning touchdown pass to Roy Upchurch. So McElroy today on his radio show on Jocks here in Birmingham with Cole Kubelik, who, of course, is a former Auburn center, he kind of whistled past the graveyard. Oh, it's no big deal. Oh, look, so Alabama has to go to Auburn. So they have to win the Iron Bowl in Jordan-Hare Stadium to get to the playoff. They should win that game. They're the better team. They've had the better season. They have a better record. Their coach hasn't been fired. They're not looking for a new coach. No comparison between these teams. If that's what you have to do, you just go do it. As if that were easy. It wasn't easy for McElroy and Rolando McClain and Heisman winner Mark Ingram and Trent Richardson and Roy Upchurch and Nick Saban and Kirby Smart, who was the defensive coordinator. It wasn't easy that day in 2009. It wasn't easy in 2021 and 2023 when Alabama had playoff teams. Alabama had teams that would go on to win the SEC championship game. And they went to Auburn, and they played 2 of the worst coaches in Auburn history, 2 of the worst quarterbacks in Auburn history, in TJ Finley and Peyton Thorne. And they did it with a Heisman winner at quarterback in Bryce Young at Alabama and a third-round NFL draft choice at quarterback for Alabama in 23 in Jalen Milroe. And they had to come from behind and pull a miraculous drive and a miraculous play out of their hindquarters to beat those really bad Auburn teams. So if you don't think that this Alabama team is going to struggle on November 29th, if you don't think it's going to take something special from this Alabama team on November 29th, you have not paid any attention to the history of the Iron Bowl. I have. I like to think of myself as an Iron Bowl-ologist. I need a nameplate on my desk here to proclaim me as such. My first game in this series that I attended was 1985, a.k.a. the Kick, Van Tiffen. So if it's going to come down to the fourth quarter, as history strongly suggests that it will, how has Alabama performed in the fourth quarter this year? Has Alabama been a fourth quarter team? Has Alabama started fast and finished strong this season as it's gotten as high as number 4 in the country, as it's bounced back from that ugly loss to open the season against Florida State and won 8 straight games before that train got derailed on Saturday? How's Alabama done it? Can we look at that, Brendan? Because we've got it. We've got receipts. We've got numbers. And instead of starting fast and finishing strong, which was always Nick Saban's mantra, Kalen DeBoer's second Alabama team has started and finished meh. Let's look at Alabama's score by quarters in SEC games this year. Their best quarter has been the second quarter. They've scored 92 points, and they've outscored their SEC opponents, the 7 to date, by a total of 48 points. They've only outscored their opponents by 4 points in the first quarter. And the third quarter is where Alabama has really struggled. Out of the locker room in the second half, they are underwater. They've been outscored by 12 points in the third quarters of SEC games. They've only scored 23 points themselves in the third quarters of those 7 games. Not good. They've been better in the fourth quarter. It's been their second best quarter overall. But even there, they've outscored their opponents by 15. Alabama scored 42 points in 7 games. Their opponents in the SEC have scored 27. So not especially inspiring, I would say. That's why I say start finish meh. Alabama's been really good in the second quarter. And that was the case again. Let me look at my handy-dandy notebook and my handy-dandy legal pad. And if you look at what happened Saturday, that played out again. Against Oklahoma, Alabama did not score in the first quarter and did not score in the fourth quarter. It put up 2 touchdowns in the second quarter, added a third or one more in the third quarter. Meanwhile, Oklahoma scored in every quarter, and they kicked the field goal that won the game in the fourth quarter. And by the way, that kicker for Oklahoma, if he's not an All-American, I don't know what an All-American kicker is. He's been fantastic for the Sooners. He was one of the differences in that game. And by the way, let me just say this. You know, we say Alabama gave the game away to Oklahoma. Alabama almost doubled Oklahoma in total yardage. And that's true. But guess what? Alabama's responsible for botching its own field goal. Ty Simpson threw the pick six. But Oklahoma, the set that Brent Venables ran, kind of tricked Ty Simpson a little bit. And then on the punt return that Ryan Williams fumbled, he didn't just drop it. It was punched out. That is a stellar defensive play, or a stellar defensive special teams play, I should say. So Oklahoma created the turnovers. Alabama didn't just hand the ball to the Sooners. So let's give Oklahoma some credit. Let's say it right here. Oklahoma's got the best defense in America. I fully believe that now, having watched a lot of their games throughout the year, but having watched every second more than once of the Auburn game back in September and the Alabama game Saturday. Oklahoma is legit. And Brent Venables is poison to Alabama football. Go back to his days at Clemson and now his time at Oklahoma. Alabama has had all kinds of problems with Brent Venables' defenses. And even when they scored, even when they put up some points against them back in 2016, Clemson scored more and won the national championship. And don't even remind Alabama fans of what happened in the 2018 national championship game, or the national championship game after the 2018 season, when Trevor Lawrence and company for the Tigers just blew Alabama out of the water. So you don't want to see Brent Venables again. And if you're Alabama and you do beat Auburn and you do get to the playoff, you certainly don't want to see Oklahoma again. There are a lot of teams you would rather line up against than those guys, despite your yardage advantage. They don't give trophies for that. They only give trophies for what happens on the scoreboard. So we are headed toward another historic, diabolical Iron Bowl in less than 2 weeks. And I'm going to share with you, I've done this before. This may be, well, it is certainly on the short list of my favorite leads that I have written in my sports journalism career. I wrote this after the 2019 Iron Bowl in Auburn. Auburn won that game 48-45. Mac Jones for Alabama, who had to step in for an injured Tua Tagovailoa, who got hurt a game or two before that. Mac Jones threw 6 touchdown passes that day for Alabama. The problem was he threw 4 of them to his teammates. He threw 2 of them to Auburn players. 2 pick sixes in the same game. And after that game, and Gus Malzahn outsmarted Nick Saban at the very end. He sent his punt team out, then he sent his offense back out, and it so confused Alabama. They had 12 men on the field, creating a penalty that allowed Auburn to keep the ball and not have to kick it back to Jalen Waddle for one last chance at history. So after that game, I sat down at my laptop, this laptop actually, and I wrote this lead. And hat tip to Dreamland. I used your slogan, ain't nothing like it nowhere. The Iron Bowl in Auburn. The Iron Bowl in Auburn is the Mount Olympus of heroes and goats, the Dante's Inferno of decisive and derisive moments, the Magic Kingdom of beautiful madness, the biennial bipolar opposite of joyless murder ball. More often than not, the end game of this game to end all games is Alabama's ass on Auburn's grass, and they're not going to keep him off the field tonight. Rest in peace, Rod Bramlett. That's the Iron Bowl in Auburn. You know it's coming, but you don't see it coming. You know something weird, bizarre, phantasmagorical, to use one of my favorite Bugs Bunny words, is going to happen in that game. But you don't know when it's going to happen, usually late. You don't know exactly how it's going to happen. You don't know if you're going to see a kick six. You don't know if you're going to see a gravedigger. You don't know if you're going to see Brian Harsin demonstrate that his potatoes aren't large enough to go for two and win the game right there after the first overtime or at the end of the first overtime. You don't know who's going to shrink and who's going to swell. You don't know who's going to roll over and who's going to step over them. But you know it's going to be special. You know it's going to be magical. You know it's going to be historical. And that's what we're headed toward. So in that sense, let me say thank you, Kalen DeBoer. Let me say thank you, Ty Simpson. Thank you, Ryan Grubb. Thank you, Kane Womack. Or your defense did a great job. You don't really deserve a mention here. But thank you to everyone who contributed to Alabama losing the game to Oklahoma. Thank you mostly to Brent Venables and John Mateer and company. Because with Oklahoma beating Alabama, you have set up the game to end all games. And I don't care, as I said before, that Kalen DeBoer has coached for a national championship. He has never, ever in his entire coaching life experienced anything like what he's going to feel when he walks into Jordan-Hare Stadium on the late afternoon of November 29th, 2025. The whole world will be watching, and it's going to be special. So let's hurry up. Let's fast forward. Can we get through this weekend? Can we get past Mercer? Can we roll over Eastern Illinois? Can we get to Iron Bowl week? Because that is Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's all rolled into one. And I, for one, cannot wait. All right. Thank you, everyone. That's it for me today. I've got to save it for the game. I don't want to peak too early. We'll have a lot more to say about that game as we get closer and closer here on Scarbo Knows. I'm Scarbo. I'm Kevin Scarbinsky. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. If you listen on, of course, Apple Podcasts, you can listen to Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find Scarbo Knows. Thank you to Brendan Martin, our executive producer on the Sidelines.live network. You can watch this show and all the great shows there, and I encourage you to do so. And a special shout out to our sponsor, Money Management Services, Birmingham's financial services firm. Good friends of mine, the Rice family, they'll take great care of you. Listen to what they have to say next. I'm out. Have a great night. See ya.
Since 1992, Money Management Services in Birmingham has provided individuals and business owners with trusted, fee-only financial advice. We're more than advisors, we're your financial family. From retirement planning to tax strategies and estate planning, our team builds personalized wealth management plans tailored to your life. At Money Management Services, we treat you like family, because when you walk through our doors, you become part of ours.